When Proton introduced the X90 as its flagship, the rest of us looked at it and thought, yeah, well, that makes sense. Not only is it its largest car, but that was also Proton's best model ever, with a fantastic interior, a brand new engine, pretty good spec, and overall it felt that it was deserving of flagship status. And then came the X50, where we thought, okay, this is like an X70 condensed for people who want a slightly more compact car. And then the X90 showed up, which is now Proton's new flagship, and we're a little skeptical because under this bonnet is a tiny engine, and back there is a huge amount of space, and all of this is for 152,000 ringgit. And in this video, we're going to find out if the Proton X90 is deserving of its flagship status, and more importantly, if it's deserving of a spot in your garage. My name is Ayman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, and before we get into it, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to notify every time we make a new upload. So as I mentioned earlier, this is Proton's flagship model. And so the corporate face has been reworked ever so slightly to sort of be slightly more online with that status. So the grille, which still includes the infinite weave design, now includes these little chrome diamond pins, which Proton says reminds them of batik and songket, which I don't quite believe. The ethereal bow now looks even flatter than ever before, which is fitting because archery wasn't really a part of our culture. And on either side, you still get full LED headlights. Now, these headlights, I'm not sure if they'll do it right now, have a nice sort of starting sequence function. No, I can't do it right now, but we'll have a cutscene that shows you how they work. And as far as I'm concerned, it looks a little chintzy to me, but whatever. Now, down here, there are triple LED fog lights with a projector in each nodule, which I think is very elaborate for something that most people abuse rather than use properly. But because it's an SUV, of course, you get some unpainted plastic and even a bash plate on the front, as if anyone's taking this thing off-road. Now, down the side, this is where you can really tell the X90's heft, because this is a very large vehicle. So much so that the 19-inch wheels wrapped in Continental Eco Contact 6 tires look kind of small. And in fact, if you were to get an X90 in a lower trim variant, where you get even smaller wheels, I think it would look a little bit sad. Now, you do get a lot of chrome trim down the side, like around the windows and at the bottom of the doors, and you do get satin roof rails up here, which are functional, should you want to put a roof box, although you really shouldn't. Now, on the side, there are a few details that I do quite like the wheels, as well as I mentioned, the chrome surround earlier, because it does make the car look a little bit more premium. What I do not like is this badge. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a relatively small engine up front, but it's aided by a 48-volt mild hybrid system. And so this badge is to let you know that this car is a mild hybrid. Problem is, this badge looks terrible. Now back here, this is not a fridge. So for starters, you get these full LED taillights, replete with a very large LED indicator, not that many Malaysians use them, and you also have your fog lights and reverse lights down here. Proton is very keen to point out the fact that this Proton badge is now different because they have beveled edges to make it look upmarket. Okay, now behind this little button here and behind this tailgate, which lifts electronically, you will find 6 seats in this car, although you can get it as a 7-seater, and with the third row deployed, is not really a lot of room. Maybe you can fit a couple of cabin-sized luggages, but that is about it. But the thing about the X90, and as well as other 3-row SUVs, is that most people use them as 5+2s, which means this third row is normally tumbled. And if tumbled as such, with the corresponding noise, ooh, not that one, quality, you will end up finding quite a lot of space back here. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the space here is certainly usable, but there's no tonneau cover. Now, the Peugeot 5008 and Chery Tiggo 8 Pro and the Kia Sorento and various other 3-row SUVs offer a tonneau cover for the third row, and the fact that this is just empty doesn't really inspire confidence, because it means that if I do have valuables back here, like my equipment bag, which I just realized I've told 14,000 subscribers about, and now they know what to steal from my car, it's very exposed. I don't like that at all. Maybe it's better for passengers. Well, I guess it's all right back here. Like most other three-row SUVs, these seats are mounted very low to the floor, which means as an adult sat here, I don't really have any under-thigh support at all. Mercifully, however, footroom is pretty much all right with these seats set up in sort of like a middling position, where I have a decent amount of knee room, and headroom is not really all that bad. And because these seats are mounted kind of high, I can actually tuck my feet in under the seat in front of me, although as you can see, I still don't have much in the way of under-thigh support even if I do that. Now, the good news, however, begins now, where you will find that you have adjustable rear headrests, which is always very appreciated. You have USB-A ports on either side. You have a tiny cup holder on either side, a little pad for you to put things. And of course, the two rear passengers have their own rear aircon vents, which is nice because at least anyone who is banished to the third row will at least be relatively comfortable. Now, in this six-seater model, what we've discovered is that the second row seats do not tumble so much. The angle from which you're seeing right now is with the second row seat sort of pushed forward and tumbled forward about as far as it can go, which means I suspect the way you're supposed to get in here is by going through sort of this sort of central aisle thing, which is at least decently wide for most legs unless you're particularly well-nourished. Now, this seat is set up the way it was earlier, again with the seat bench sort of in its middling position. As you can see, I still have good knee room and decent headroom despite the full-size panoramic sunroof. Now, of course, I can slide this seat further forward up to about here, where I can still tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me very comfortably, in fact, which means if I need to make all the space in the world for the third row, I can do so relatively comfortably. And of course, if I just want space for myself, well, then there is plenty of it. Now, in case you're wondering, the benefit of having the six-seater over the seven-seater comes in terms of equipment. So for starters, you get that panoramic sunroof that I mentioned earlier, and for the second row, you get air conditioning adjustment as well as ventilated second row seats. That's right, these seats have ventilation but only in the base, so it keeps your arse warm but your back can overheat. And of course, when you're sat here, you can adjust the angle of these rear seats all the way to about here, which means I could pretty much have a nap. And that is facilitated further by these winged headrests, so you can pull them out and it'll keep your head in place should you be taking that nap I mentioned earlier. Now, in terms of rear accoutrements, I still have my own aircon vents, one on either side, and as I mentioned earlier, you can adjust the blower speed from the middle. I have a USB-C and USB-A port, this little cubby down here, I have some rear door pockets, and of course, there is the boss switch to adjust the front seat from here, which means if there's somebody sat here, you can very easily adjust the seat to move out of the way to provide a little bit more space. You have some door bins here, but a notable omission are actually cup holders. Now, I'm made to understand that in the car with the bench, the seven-seater, you have an armrest with cup holders, but in the six-seater, well, don't drink anything. But arguably, it's about what's going on here that'll be the deciding factor for buyers. And on the surface, things look kind of all right. You get a couple of USB-A ports there, a wireless charging pad. You have the electronic gear selector here, as well as your drive mode selector down here. You have more buttons for your automatic parking, your parking sensors, your electronic parking brake, your 360 camera, your traction control, and even hill descent control. Proton really thinks people will be taking this off-road. Now, underneath the center console, you will find a good amount of space where you'll find a 12-volt socket. And underneath this center armrest, which folds open like an older S-Class, you will find a good amount of space, a really good amount of space. You can see my arm is practically disappearing in here. It's just a shame that there is no air conditioning vents in there to keep items cool. Now, you do have cup holders here, you've got bottle holders down there, you have a little pocket here which is big enough to fit the key. But all of this is secondary because ultimately when you're sat here, what's most important is the driving position as well as the technology. So on the technology first, we now get an updated version of the Acotech infotainment system, which is a completely different operating experience compared to what we've seen from the X50 and the X70. It's presented differently as well. This is the biggest touchscreen ever fitted to a Proton. It is relatively responsive, the graphics are decent, but it still does not have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which Proton says is because of data security and protection and so on, although I don't see those issues from BYD or Chery. Now, in front of me is a digital instrument cluster, which again, we've seen from the X50 and the X70 before, but here it is in the form of just a screen. And again, the graphics are pretty good. This is a more updated, more state-of-the-art system compared to what we've seen from previous Protons, and I do appreciate the data and the way it's all laid out. There are some gimmicky things like some weather displays and stuff like that, which I don't really see the point of. But most importantly, when you are using this car's ADAS systems, you'll be able to see the car being able to pick out different vehicles along the road, which again makes you feel a little bit more confident in the system itself. Now, in terms of the driving position, this is a little bit of a concern because these two front seats are powered and ventilated, which is good. The trouble is this particular seat doesn't seem to adjust for angle, it only adjusts for height. And so the higher you bring the seat, the tilt actually changes on the base, which means under-thigh support can be a bit of a luxury. On top of that, this steering wheel, which adjusts for reach and rake, doesn't seem to come out far enough, because this seat is set up in the way I'd be most comfortable. As you can see, I have to really reach for the steering wheel. Now, if I were to move a little bit closer, now my knees are a little bit suspended. It's a weird thing. So this car wants you to sit a little bit taller. We've seen this from other Proton SUVs before, but when you do that, again, the angle of the bench doesn't seem to change. It's a very strange omission, this. On top of that, despite the fact that these are electric seats, there is no memory functionality, which is strange because that is a matter of literally 2 buttons and some programming, which shouldn't have cost them that much. You do get very large door mirrors, and the view out of them is not so bad. You get this frameless mirror up here, which I do quite like, but the most valuable feature in this car to me, sunglasses holder, of course. Now, all of that, jokes aside and so on, the X90 is clearly geared at families, which is why there's a lot of space, that's why there's a lot of practicality, and that's why it's got a pretty decent engine up front in order to motivate this thing without burning your wallet. But this is still a Proton. So what is it like to drive? So getting over the slightly strange driving position, it's quite clear that the X90 is set up very much to be this large, comfortable machine within which you're supposed to do many, many miles. So under the bonnet, you'll find a 1.5-litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine mated to a 48-volt mild hybrid system, which is then paired to a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. Now, when you put all of that together, the power and torque figures are not exactly headline, but it is significantly more than what you get from just the 1.5-litre turbocharged engine. According to Proton, they did actually test the X90 with just the turbocharged engine without the mild hybrid system, and using the 48-volt system, this car apparently achieves up to 10% better fuel economy. Now, in the real world, what that means is essentially the X90 is able to cruise with the engine off, for example, which they call smart coasting. So you're able to switch the engine off and just coast in order to save a little bit more fuel. And it's also able to assist in high-stress situations. So when you're starting from a standstill, for example, or when you're trying to overtake, the 48-volt motor will be able to kick in and provide a little bit more punch when you need it. All of this is in order to ensure that the engine is not under too much load at any given time, again, in a way to ensure better fuel economy. The other added benefit is the fact that with the 48-volt mild hybrid motor, which is essentially a starter motor, it also means that this car's start-stop system is a lot smoother than what you get from any other Proton, or in fact any other vehicle with a start-stop function without a mild hybrid system. Because the engine starts and stops very smoothly indeed. In fact, if you try and start this car from, off, it also begins in a very smooth manner, which is all very positive. Now, talking about those positives, the ride in the X90 is also of particular note. Now, Proton actually spent quite a lot of time refining the ride and handling of the X90 to the point that when they received the initial donor cars from Geely, they were deeply unsatisfied with the standard rear suspension setup, which they found was too simplistic and not adequate for Malaysian buyers. And so they pioneered research and development of a multi-link rear suspension setup, which is what we see in this car, and as a result, it does drive really well. It handles primary and secondary ride very, very well. This car settles down very quickly and it goes over bigger undulations in the motorway quite smoothly as well. And on top of that, at no point does this car feel floaty. A lot of Chinese vehicles are accused of feeling floaty. The X70, for example, can be quite floaty, whereas this is nice and planted. It is confidence-inspiring, it's easy to use, it is what you'd expect from a vehicle of this size and caliber. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the ride and handling in this X90 is as good as, if not slightly better, than what you get from the Mazda CX-8, which I argue is the very best three-row SUV currently on the market. Now, in terms of the engine, so we've spoken about the powertrain and how that works. However, in operation, things are not too great. So firstly, this engine, although it is very far away from where I'm seated, it's still quite pronounced nonetheless. The rattles and vibrations that you get from this three-cylinder can be felt just a little bit through the chassis and therefore through my seat. But mercifully, when you're driving it day to day, for the most part, it is a quiet partner. It just gets things done without any fuss or hassle. And mercifully, despite the fact that this is a tiny engine compared to the size of the vehicle, it does provide adequate power and torque. This car can get up and go if you want it to, although really that's not what you want to be doing in a car like this anyway. If you're just looking to merge into a motorway the way I just have, although perhaps with a little bit more urgency, then this powertrain is plenty good enough. You don't really need much more than this. I think Proton was quite intelligent in terms of selecting this setup for the X90 because, again, it is just right for this car. Not great, but just right. However, when you tend to press on a little bit further beyond the national speed limit, say about 130 thereabouts, you will discover that this engine reaches its limits quite quickly. So all of that torque is produced relatively down low, but there isn't really that much of it. And so if you start to head up further into the rev range, you'll discover that, well, it sort of ends. And so you end up with a motor that's making a lot of noise, but not a lot of go, which is certainly not all that great. Although, again, I would argue that that is not the nature of vehicles like this. A car like this is meant to do about 110, 120 on the motorway and just chill out. This is a cruising car, and for cruising, this powertrain is good enough. But its ace up its sleeve is actually economy in town. So compared to this car's biggest rival, which is the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro, the Proton X90 is impressively frugal during town driving. No doubt that 48-volt mild hybrid system is helping immensely because through our testing of this vehicle, it's done an average of about 8.8 liters per 100 kilometers, which is, again, pretty good for a car like this. That is on par with vehicles like the Peugeot 5008, which runs a 1.6 liter turbocharged petrol engine, although that does produce a little bit more power and torque. And so this makes it a pretty pleasant place to be. And again, that little starter motor helps to ensure the stop-start system works as seamlessly as possible, which again helps to save fuel when you're stuck in traffic. Further aiding things is this car's level 2 semi-autonomy system, which is available in the flagship and premium models only, which add things like blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, adaptive cruise control with stop and go function, among other things. And when you put all of that together, this does make this a relatively pleasant car to do your daily grind in, be it driving from home to work and work to home, or to drive the kids to school and back. So overall, it does seem pretty good, right? Well, not really, because this car's biggest drawback is actually in terms of comfort, which I can split in two ways. Firstly is this seat. The lack of comfort of this seat and the lack of adjustability makes things a bit difficult, but also the seats themselves aren't exactly the best pews out there. There's not really much in terms of lateral support, although that could be forgiven. But these headrests, for example, with their wings are not all that great either. They're about as firm as regular headrests, which means you don't really rest your head on them in the first place. And then there's the other side of comfort, which is refinement. Now, the X90 is touted as Proton's most refined vehicle. I beg to disagree. The Proton X90 is a much quieter vehicle, particularly at speed. The engine still does the same sort of rattly, vibration-y nonsense, but when you are driving, once you've gotten over that, it's gotten settled into a cruise and whatever, the X90 has very impressive levels of wind and road noise suppression. Whereas this X90, doing 90 kilometers an hour on a relatively popular road in Subang Jaya, is quite loud. I can't blame the tires because Continental do make relatively quiet tires, and it might be the noise suppression material within the car, which I'm told has been modified slightly from when it was first released due to some issues. Now, if you ask me, given that this is supposed to be Proton's flagship model, I would have expected this to be markedly better than the X70. The interior quality of this car is not that great. There are far more hard plastics than I'd like to see, particularly in something that costs about 25 to 30,000 ringgit more than the X70. And then there is the fact that with the level of, or lack of refinement that you're getting in this car, it begs the question, if you're looking for a large, luxurious SUV that's not too expensive to buy, why wouldn't you just buy an X70 instead? Because if you're looking for the extra seats, then unfortunately you have to look at the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro. Everything is fine. Why are you screaming? It does that a lot too. Although usually it's a little bit more refined, a little bit quieter. It's just that when it thinks I'm about to hit something, which I really wasn't, it likes to scream. But in any case, the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro compared to this was a very, very refined vehicle. Not only was the interior materials just better quality all the way around, but also that car was impressively quiet at speed. If there are two areas where the X90 does better than the Chery, it is in terms of fuel economy, naturally, because the Chery has a class-leading 2-litre turbocharged engine which produces segment-leading numbers and therefore consumes more fuel than most other competitors. And of course, in terms of ride and handling, the Proton has it licked as well, because this is just a better judged suspension all around. But as I've mentioned multiple times in this review, you don't really care about dynamics if you're buying a car like this. What you want is something that is comfortable and safe and practical for you to shuffle your family about in. And to that end, the Chery's softer, more corseting ride might be what customers prefer. And in terms of that powertrain, well, when you're on the motorway and you want to overtake, cruising, of course, in terms of fuel economy, the Chery does about as well as the X90. But where the Chery can pick up its skirt and heave-ho when it needs to, the X90 doesn't, because there really isn't that much headroom in terms of performance with this car. So, who does the X90 really beat? Well, compared to a Toyota Innova, for example, which is still available on the market, even though you can buy an Innova Xenix, this is a much better car. Better powertrain, better interior, better specifications, better safety tech, a better car all the way around. But compared to that Chery, not so much. In fact, the difference between the X90 and the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro is only about 8,000 ringgit. And in between, you gain things like a more powerful motor, an extra 2 years on the warranty, as well as several other things. Although, admittedly, Proton does offer a service package with this car, which does make it relatively competitive to run. But what I'll say is this: if you are penny pinching and you only have 150,000 bucks to spend on a 7-seater SUV, then this is probably a pretty good cause. If you are looking at the Toyota Innova, the Proton X90 is definitely a better car in every measurable way. Although, if you're looking for the level best in the segment, then that still goes to the Mazda CX-8, which feels like a properly premium experience throughout. And you can also get that with a 2.5-litre turbocharged engine, which gives you plenty of performance, whether or not you need it. And if you're looking for something a bit bigger, then the Kia Sorento is probably worth a shout, because that is a significantly larger vehicle, and you can also get that with a 2.2-litre turbo diesel, which makes it an absolutely fantastic partner out on the motorway. But if you're looking to spend within 150 to 160,000 ringgit, then I would urge you to check the Chery Tiggo 8 Pro first. Because yes, the brand may not quite have the same cachet as Proton does, if that is the word I should be using here, but it is a very, very good package, and it's certainly one you need to consider before you make a decision on something like this. But if you want something that drives markedly better and you spend the majority of your time in town and in urban traffic and that sort of thing, then the X90 is probably the car for you. Although there is also the Peugeot 5008, which also has a very small engine. Bit hard, this one. Maybe we need to test this a little bit further to see where else it claws points back. But in any case, that's been our review of the 2023 Proton X90 1.5 TGDI mild hybrid flagship. What a name. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.